another exciting episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Wes Bryan, and in today's episode, we're coming back at you with more VMware. That's right, VMware Certified Professional version 6, and this is a part 2 in Snapshots. Joining me in the studios is none other than Mr. Don Pizzette. Don, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing swell, Wes. We're ready to dive back into, well, snapshots, right? So if you watch part 1, we talked about what snapshots were and how they work. We saw taking a few snapshots, but you may have gone out and gone snapshot crazy in your environment, and in the back of your mind, you're thinking, boy, Don really harped on about performance with snapshots, and now I got a bunch of snapshots. So what do I do to kind of reclaim that? And so that's what we need to take a look at in this episode, is how we manage those snapshots. Once you've got them created, they certainly serve a purpose, right? You definitely don't want to shy away from using them. They're a tool that's available to you that makes recovering from changes very, very easy. You can jump right back and get things running really, really fast. But when you're done with a snapshot, we need to get rid of it. All right, and so let's start right there. Let's start with how we delete a snapshot. So in the last episode, I took this Windows machine, WinClient01, and I'm just going to pull up its snapshot list. I'm going to right-click on the VM and go to Snapshots and Manage Snapshots. And what we'll see is the little hierarchy that we made. I had a snapshot that I called prior to installing Google Chrome. We didn't actually install Chrome. We installed Notepad++ instead. And so here we've got after installing, and we did after installing Notepad++, and that's where I am right now. Okay, so let's say that everything went just fine. Everything upgraded, Notepad++ is running great. I don't need this snapshot anymore. Okay, I'm not going to roll back to it, or prior to installing, I'm not going to roll back to that one. So I want to get rid of the snapshot. Okay, well, you can delete a snapshot at any time. When you're done with snapshot, you can get rid of it. Now, when I choose this snapshot here, prior to installing Google Chrome, I can see where that corresponds with a file on the disk, right? If I go to my data store and I go into where that virtual machine is storing its files, we can go into WinClient01, and that was the first snapshot that I took. So that prior to installing Google Chrome snapshot is this file right here that ultimately grew to almost 3 gigs in size, right? So that's the file. That's what it's occupying. If I delete the snapshot, I should see this file disappear. Now I've got a second snapshot. That's the one that was after installing Notepad++. If I delete the Chrome snapshot, this one should go away. The Notepad++ one should stay, right? It should still be there. So let's see that happens. So I'm going to go back to managing the snapshots for that client. I'm just going to delete the snapshot that we made. Now, the machine is up and running right now, right? And I think I'm actually connected to it. Here it is. So this is the machine. It's up. It's running. I can fire up Notepad++ or whatever other programs I want. So the machine's active right now. And if I delete that snapshot, I'm just going to highlight the snapshot and hit delete. It's going to say, am I sure I want to delete it? And yes, I'm sure. And it's going to go and it's going to delete it out. Now, what effect is that going to have on the virtual machine? Well, none at all. That snapshot is deleting. Back here, I can still be working on that machine. It's still up and it's running, because remember what I'm accessing. I'm accessing the snapshot VMDK for the most current snapshot, and then it's doing read-throughs to the other ones. Well, if a snapshot disappears in the middle, it just skips right over it, right? So I don't have that snapshot to go back and read anymore, and we're able to access that data. So in a moment, I guess if I close this, let's see if the task is finished here. It's still churning along, removing that snapshot. Okay, now, why is it taking so long? If I'm just deleting a snapshot, it doesn't just go and delete the VMDK and that's it? Well, there's actually some interesting things that are happening behind the scenes, because think of it this way. Let me bring my diagram back up. All right, so let's say this is what I've got, right? I've got a couple of different things in place here. Let me put this back to the way it was. There. All right, so right now, if I'm reading from the system, I'm going to read from something like this first sector, right? When I go to read from that first sector, I'm going to look, and I'm going to get the data right from there, okay? But if I get data from the second sector, I've got to read through and hit that other snapshot on the back end. And if I'm reading something from this third one, I've got to read through all the way to the back end. Okay, so when I'm reading even from this current snapshot, from the running snapshot, I might be seeing data from all three. Well, let's say I delete this snapshot right here, right? If I delete this snapshot, I've got F written to this sector and G written to this one. If I delete that, what happens when I read from those sectors? If I'm reading from this one up here, right, or the one down here, do I see F or G? I just lost data, didn't I? It's gone. Well, the data's not actually gone. What it's doing is it's got to take that data and move it into the current snapshot. It's got to roll that in so that we've got it. So it's got to bring that data back. So before it can actually delete the snapshot, what it has to do is it has to take this data and move it, and that's not going to work with my crazy diagram, is it? So it's got to come in here and it's got to put F here and it's got to put G here. It's got to put that data where it goes so that it'll still be available to me. And once that happens, then it can delete that snapshot and get it out of there. And so now when I go to read from this sector, I get F. I get that that's the information that I have. And if I access an empty sector, it'll know to let me move right through and get to the disk on the inside, right? So it'll pull it and I get C. So now I get my full set of data. And what that means is the longer it's been since you took the snapshot, the longer it's going to take to delete it out of there. It's got to move all this information around, and deleting a snapshot is not a fast process. And while it's deleting, we're generating a ton of disk I/O, right? So if this is a database server or an email server, your disk performance is really going to suffer while this happens. And that, again, is why I say snapshots should be a temporary thing. If you keep them around for a long period of time, they become a bit of a nightmare to get rid of. So we don't want them just hanging about. Take the snapshot, make your change. If everything went the way it was supposed to, delete the snapshot, right? Don't keep it laying around, all right? So that's what's going on with my environment in the background. Is it's taking a while to remove that snapshot because it's got to roll those changes together. But once the changes are done, I should be able to go back here into the file and refresh this little file listing, and we should see that the original snapshot is gone. The WinClient01-000001.vmdk file is now gone, right? It was 2.9 gigs, it's now gone. Those changes have been rolled into the next snapshot in line. You might have several tiers of snapshot. It just goes to whatever's the next one in line, and that's where that data goes, right? So now it's in there, and we're in business. So that's part of the process when we delete them. But deleting the actual snapshot, not a hard thing to do, right? It's just generating disk I/O and taking time. All right, so we definitely want to make sure we do that we delete those snapshots when we don't need them anymore, and continue from there. The other thing, though, is sometimes that can fail. It goes to consolidate the data. What it's doing when you delete it and it moves that data over, it's called consolidating, right? So it's got to consolidate that data in and get it put into the other disk. And sometimes that can fail. It should be automatic. For me, it was completely automatic. I didn't have to do anything. I deleted the snapshot, it rolled it in for me, all right? If you ever get a failure, though, then sometimes it'll just stop and you can repeat the process on your own. Other times you need to wait for when the disk I/O is a little bit less through the roof, and then you can generate, maybe it's just too much contention with other VMs. So what'll happen is if the system is too busy, VMware and vSphere might say, you know what, we're going to delete the snapshot, we'll mark it as deleted, but we'll consolidate the storage later. And it just sits around. And if that happens, you can force it to consolidate. And you do that by right-clicking on the virtual machine, not the host like I'm doing here. Let me go back to the virtual machine. And you'll right-click on the virtual machine, you'll go to snapshots, and if there's unconsolidated changes, this link will light up. Mine's grayed out because it consolidated just fine, but if it had decided to wait, then you could hit consolidate and force it to happen right now, or force it to retry if it failed to do it before. So you've got that option, and that's what consolidating the snapshot is. So pretty easy to trigger that and get that put in place, right? So this is just manually triggering consolidation. For me, whenever I delete a snapshot, I always monitor to make sure that the data actually goes away. If it doesn't, now we know to go and consolidate. But it should automatically go away, so we shouldn't have to really mess with it at all. And as we go through and start deleting our snapshots, it's going to continue that consolidation. So when I manage my snapshots here, I'm down to just one snapshot. I've got my base disk and the one snapshot, and then you are here, right? So where I'm at currently. So if I delete this snapshot, all that's left is the base disk, and you are here, and that means my changes are now a part of the base disk, right? This base disk isn't actually a snapshot. See how I don't have a clock on it, right? So if I were to roll back to that, if I were to try and revert to it, it's not truly a snapshot, it's just the original VMDK that's sitting there read-only. And so I can bump back to it, and if I eliminate all my snapshots, then it's no longer read-only. Now it becomes read-write, and my changes apply to it. If I were to delete this guy after installing Notepad++, there's no other snapshot for these changes to get rolled into. So the changes would get rolled into the base disk. right? So if I take after installing Notepad++, and I'll choose revert to, and when we revert to this one, it's going to roll, well, shoot, I didn't mean to revert. I meant to delete it. I'm reverting. I haven't made any changes, so it's just going to revert me back to right where I am. Sorry, I meant to delete it. If I choose it and I hit delete, there we go. I'm at this you are here point. I'm going to stay at the you are here point, right? Because that's where I am. I'm up and I'm running. But the changes that are a part of that VMDK are now getting written to the base disk so that now it's all a part of the VM. The snapshots are gone. If my base disk was thick provisioned, now my changes are in the thick provision disk, and I'm back to my normal performance profile. So this is the way that we would go about it. If I'm about to make a change, you take a snapshot, you make your changes. If everything's good, you delete your snapshot. Now you're back to just having a base disk like normal. And see how my revert to button is grayed out? I can't revert to the base disk. My changes are now in the base disk, and that's where we are. We're up and we're running, and that's it. All right. So if I go back to my data store, and come in here and take a look at it, I'll have to refresh my file list. But my snapshot files should be gone, the backed up configuration should be gone, and they are. Yep. Sometimes, if you come in here too fast, the files will still be there, but I can see that I'm now back to just having my base disk. All right. One thing I didn't show you guys about this is I mentioned how the snapshot, it doesn't include just the disk, right? It includes the configurations. And I had modified my configuration but never went back and verified it. So let's take a look at that, right? If I take this Windows 7 machine as it is now, it's got, let's go into my task manager and see how much memory I have in this thing. So actually it'd be easier to pull it up in my system properties. You gotta remember I haven't used Windows 7 in a while. So this machine has 1.5 gigs of RAM right now, okay? And I'm gonna change this wallpaper, and we'll make it, well actually before I change the wallpaper, let me take a snapshot of this. So I've got 1.5 gigs as the machine is configured right now. So I'm going to come in here and take a snapshot. We'll jump up here to snapshots and take a snapshot. And I'll call this, base configuration or something like that, right? So this is how I normally have it configured. I'm going to go ahead and snapshot it, okay? Now it's taking that snapshot in the background, and I don't actually have to wait for it to complete. I can go and work with the machine even though it's taking the snapshot right now, because it's doing all of its work on the back end. It's just going to be really slow while I work with it. And so what happens is, well, two things. First off, marking the hard drive as read-only, that's very, very fast, and so it does that. But capturing the memory is the hard part. And so this machine's actually frozen for me right now. If I try and click, see how I'm not able to do anything? And the reason is it's got to freeze the memory for a second so it can grab a copy of it and then unfreeze it. In a production system, it normally happens very quickly. But here in my lab, I'm kind of taxing the system, and so it was frozen. Well, did you see what just happened? Everything that I did, every click that I tried to do, it saved them, and now it's performing them. So I'm actually able to use the machine even while it's frozen. It just stutters, and then it catches up. So you lose no data when you take a snapshot, but you can create a micro outage, right? If this was a production database server with 30 gigs of RAM, and it took 2 minutes to grab the memory, that's 2 minutes this system was basically frozen, and my end users would see that. So it's not something we just want to go willy-nilly about. If you choose not to capture the memory, though, then it's really fast. And we had that option. We could choose not to capture the memory. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this desktop, and I'm going to just put it back to one of the crazy backgrounds that Microsoft loves, apparently a lighthouse today. So I'm going to change that background, and then I'm going to shut it down, and I'm going to bump its memory up to 2 gigs. Okay, so I only had 1.5 gigs a moment ago. I'm going to bump this up to 2 gigs of RAM again, and then fire the machine back up. All right, so that one's going to shut down. And now that it's shut down, I can go in and edit its hardware options. And we're going to take its memory. Oh, shoot, it still thinks it's on. Let me refresh. I'm doing things in 2 different windows, so it takes a moment to recognize that. That's one of the negatives of the web client. So I'm going to edit this, and I'm just going to bump it back up to 2 gigs of RAM. So I'm just kind of cranking that number back up, and then I'll power that machine on. All right, so now it says that it's got 2 gigs of RAM. Just wait for that task to finish, and then we'll boot that one up again. All right, so there it goes, and we should see it booting. There it goes. All right, now when the machine comes up, I've modified the wallpaper. That was fun, and I bumped up the memory. Well, the wallpaper, that's a part of the VMDK, that's part of the disk, right? It gets written to the registry gets written to the hard drive. But the memory size, The memory size is stored in the VMX file, right? That VMX file that defines our configuration, the number of CPUs, the hard disks we have, what ISOs mounted in the CD drive, what network adapters we have, all that's in the VMX file. Well, that's part of the snapshot. So when this machine boots up, here we go, I'll see that it has 2 gigs of RAM because the VMDK told me it would, right? Because the VMX file had that setting. And so if I pull up the properties from my computer, I'll pull that up, and we'll see there's 2 gigs of RAM, okay? But if I revert back to that last snapshot, so I'm going to go to Snapshots and revert to latest snapshot. When I revert back, it's going to roll me back, and my wallpaper's back to the way that it was, and my memory, well, memory is still being copied in. Oh, there we go. That was pretty quick. My memory is back to 1.5 gigs, right? The VMX was restored, and it put the hardware configuration. So I could have modified my network adapters. I could have added extra hard drives. I could have done all sorts of crazy things, and it puts them all back to the way they were. And it's just a great system to have. And you see how fast that was. I had a machine that was on, and I restored a snapshot that was on, and it flipped me back very, very quick. So if I had just tested a service pack and things failed, now what I used to dread the, oh, it's going to take 3 hours for me to restore this from backup. Now it's more like 3 seconds, and you're back on, and you're ready to work. All right, so that is basically it for snapshots. I feel like there's something else I wanted to mention, but I can't remember it offhand. Definitely don't shy away from snapshots. They're really, really useful. They're a great safety net. Just don't keep them around a long time. All right, do your testing, make sure everything went fine, and then delete the snapshots. Don't leave them laying around because they do hurt performance. In a lab environment, though, go crazy. Create all the snapshots you want because you're probably thin provisioning your disks anyway. And if you're thin provisioning your disks, it's about the same performance with snapshots. But if you're thick provisioning, snapshots really ruin that for you, and you lose the advantage of thick provisioning your disks.
Don, we appreciate you taking the time to show us about the snapshots and all the alternate endings and theories that we can have out there. Now I know you are wrapping this one up here, but before we do you have any final words or anything you might tell somebody that if they're in a production environment and thinking about snapshots, any advice you give them?
It's not going to be on the exam, but in real life, in the exam of life, always remember that snapshots are not a substitute for backups. Okay? Where's the snapshot stored? It's stored in the same data store as the VMDK, as the main disk, because a snapshot by itself is not useful, right? Like if I pull where's my diagram? If I pull my diagram back up, if I just have this snapshot for 8 a.m., I'm missing data that's in the base disk, right? So I have to have the base disk for the snapshot to be useful. So snapshots are stored on the same disk because that's the only way they're useful. If they were stored separately and I lose the base disk, the snapshot is pointless. So a snapshot will not protect you from hardware failures. It will not protect you from server failures or data store failures. It will only protect you from software failures. Mistakes you make inside of the virtual machine, you can roll those right back, right? It does not protect you from hardware in any way. So you absolutely have to have an actual backup solution in place to supplement this, right? Snapshots are a supplement, not a replacement for backups. And we're going to see in some of the upcoming episodes, the VMware protection, or VMware data protection, VDP. We're also going to see vSphere replication. And those are technologies that will protect us from hardware. So you don't just use snapshots, you use snapshots in coordination with some of the other backup products, and then you're taken care of.
Well, Don, as always, we do appreciate you being here, and we appreciate you, the viewer. Hopefully, when it comes to snapshots, you'll be prepared for the exam. Signing out for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Wes Bryan.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
And we'll see you next time.